Hi everybody, it's been a few days since I've been on here. Sorry about that, but I wanted to talk a little bit about some interesting details of excavations that are being found dealing with the fossil record. And I wanted to talk about how, when Jesus said at his return it would be like the days of Noah, and I've talked about the hiding of God's face and all of that, that was like the days of Noah to him. And I realized that when he comes back, that will be the unhiding of his face to Israel. But there's a couple of other things. We know how it'll be really evil, like, there'll be, the Bible says, lots of Hamas before the flood came. That's another version of it would be like the days of Noah. But what about the fact that we're living in a day and age where they can manipulate the RNA, and of course they do all kinds of genetic things with the DNA strand. So there's several really cool stories that I want to tell you about. And what if it would be like the days of Noah, because things from the past in the ancient world were being revived and resurrected from extinction? And this has happened on numerous occasions. And they've also found a dinosaur that had all of its skin on it. So I want to tell these stories. And the latest one is that scientists say that they've made a breakthrough in efforts to bring back the extinct Tasmanian tiger. And CBS reported it's been decades since Australia's thylacine, known as the Tasmanian tiger, was declared extinct. And scientists say that they've made a breakthrough as they research ways to bring back the carnivore. Well, now this animal has not been extinct for millions of years, but some of the things I'm going to share have been extinct for, in permafrost preserved. So this story with the Colossal Biosciences in a Thursday press release said that its reconstructed thylacine genome is about 99.9% complete, with 45 gaps that they'll work to close through additional sequencing in the coming months. The company also isolated long RNA molecules from a 110-year-old preserved head, which was skinned and kept in ethanol. Now, it wouldn't be so surprising to bring it back from extinction from 100 years ago or even less than that. But the very fact that some of these things lived thousands of years ago that were pre-flood and they're being resurrected could be like them being resurrected is happening right before Jesus comes. So the things in the ancient world that were preserved in the permafrost from before the flood are now being resurrected to life. And this could be one of the things that Jesus meant when he said it would be like the days of Noah when he returns. The thylacine samples used for our new reference genome are among the best preserved ancient specimens my team has worked with, said Beth Shapiro, Colossal's chief science officer and the director of the UCSC Paleogenomics lab where the samples were processed. It's rare to have a sample that allows you to push the envelope in ancient DNA methods to such an extent. Efforts to bring back the Tasmanian tiger. A preservation of a complete Tasmanian tiger head meant that scientists could study RNA samples from several important tissue areas, including the tongue, nasal cavity, brain, and eye. And it will allow researchers to determine what a thylacine would taste and smell, along with what type of vision it had and how its brain worked, according to Andrew Park, a member of Colossal's Scientific Advisory Board and researcher at the University of Melbourne's TIGRR lab. Tiger. We're getting closer every day to being able to place the thylacine back into the ecosystem, which of course is a major conservation benefit as well. Pesk, speaking with 60 Minutes earlier this year, said that researchers were working with the closest living relative of the Tasmanian tiger, a small marsupial called the fat-tailed dunnart, as a way to bring the animal back. But that little dunnart is a ferocious carnivore, even though it's very, very small. And it's a very good surrogate for us to be able to do all of this editing in. Scientists have been comparing the DNA of the dunnart and the thylacine. Pesk told 60 Minutes. From there, it's a matter of going in and editing the DNA to turn a fat-tailed dunnart cell into a thylacine cell. Colossal Biosciences on Thursday said that it had edited more than 300 unique genetic changes into a dunnart cell, making it the most edited animal cell to date. We are really pushing forward the frontier of de-extinction technologies, Pesk said, from innovative ways of finding the regions of the genome driving evolution to novel methods to determine gene function. We are in the best place ever to rebuild this species using the most thorough genome resources and the best informed experiments to determine function. Efforts aiding the revival of the Tasmanian tiger are not confined to Australia, and last year scientists recovered and sequenced RNA from a 130-year-old Tasmanian tiger specimen preserved at room temperature in Sweden's Museum of Natural History. How the Tasmanian tiger died off. Thylacines roamed Tasmania for thousands of years. Despite the Tasmanian tiger's moniker, the carnivores were marsupials like kangaroos, koalas, and Tasmania devils. The local government in the late 1800s paid out bounties to hunters presenting carcasses of Tasmanian tigers because the animals had been eating farmers' sheep, 60 Minutes previously reported, and by the mid-1930s, the Tasmanian tiger population had dwindled to a single thylacine in Beaumaris Zoo in Hobart, Tasmania's capital. It died there in 1936, and Australia has similarly allowed the culling of kangaroos, approving the deaths of thousands of kangaroos over the years. Officials have said that the kangaroo population was eating through grassy habitats of endangered species. Officials have also warned in the past that there isn't enough food available to sustain large kangaroo populations. Well, you know what? God put the animals here, and it's not for us to kill them off in, they belong to the Lord, let's put it that way. So they are 99.9% there to bringing back from extinction this tiger species of the Tasmanian tiger. So the next thing I remember that I wanted to talk about was that scientists found a dinosaur with skin on its face still intact. Scientists have made a bizarre discovery about the giants that used to roam the earth. Now, this is one of the things I've wondered, if the giants in the Bible could have been the dinosaurs. Scientists have made a freak discovery that's potentially brought us closer to dinosaurs than we've ever been before. Archaeologists uncovered one of the more well-preserved dinosaur fossils, so preserved that its very skin was still intact after all these years. Talk about good skincare routine. The discovery is now being hailed as a 1 in a billion find. And the pictures of this were taken by the Royal Tyrrell Museum of Paleontology. Scientists first discovered the groundbreaking dinosaur remains back in 2011. The miraculous find was a pretty much whole ankylosaur with its jagged spikes, most of its limbs armor coating, and even some of its stomach contents surviving a grueling fossilization process. The best addition of the discovery, though, was the creature's near immaculately preserved face and skin. Known by its fancy Latin name, Borealopelta markmicheli, the nodosaur, a type of four-legged ankylosaur, has been dubbed the world's best preserved armored dinosaur. From way back when, in the early Cretaceous period, these nodosaur remains date back anywhere, they claim, between up to 145 and 100.5 million years ago. Dr. Donald Henderson, curator of dinosaurs in the Royal Tyrrell Museum of Paleontology, has called the dino discovery 1 in a billion find. Not only is its preservation remarkable, but the fossil has now become an important key to unlock the history of the early Cretaceous ecology. The preserved skin can be studied by archaeologists to understand how the species may have lived within its environment. Scientists have since studied the nodosaur's anatomy, gut contents, and armor, giving them a whole new insight into the animal. The fossil was found in an ancient marine environment, which came as a complete surprise to researchers. Henderson explained to Ars Technica a little more about the bizarre and very unexpected find, and he said, "We can see it went in water deeper than 50 meters because it was preserved with a particular mineral and only forms in cooler temperatures in water deeper than 50 meters. So, does that mean it could have been preserved in the water of Noah's flood? That would be my first guess. But effectively, the dinosaur endured some very intense bloat and float, as it was most likely carried from a river to a sea after some flooding, and with a buildup of postmortem gases, the carcass remained buoyant. Once the gases were all out, the body simply sank to the bottom of the ocean floor in totally pristine condition after its heavy armor stopped marine scavengers from taking a bite. And Henderson added, it was just a nice set of conditions in the seabed that had very low biological activity that led to that preservation. Senior preparation technician Mark Mitchell spent 7 hours per day, 5.5 years, separating the fossil from the stone that it was encased within. Mitchell revealed that the humongous task took him a staggering 7,000 hours. You could really appreciate the impressiveness of the specimen, and that this was a living creature with astounding preservation, he recalled, and one of the biggest takeaways from the discovery lay within the purpose behind the dinosaur's distinctive back spines. Such spikes, they found, were not actually meant to ward off potential predators, but were actually used as a flirting tool to show off and attract mates. While more research needs to be done, it's clear that this discovery has definitely brought archaeologists one step closer to unlocking the secrets of the ancient world that predates us. Talk about something being set in stone. That is so amazing. Now, the next thing is that scientists discovered perfectly preserved dinosaur embryo inside fossilized egg, and the embryo was thought to date back as far as 72 million years. And of course, these dates are just kind of like grab a date out of the air. It's kind of funny to me. But scientists discovered a perfectly formed dinosaur embryo set in a storage cupboard of a Chinese museum. The embryo had been set in the cupboard for over a decade without anyone realizing that the egg could help reveal an incredible link between modern birds and dinosaurs. The unborn specimen discovered in 2015 is an Envirotorosaurus, a group of ostrich-looking feathered Maniratoran dinosaurs from the Cretaceous period, and upon its analysis was estimated to date back as far as 72 million years. It was first found in Shahi International Park in 2000 and donated to Yingliang Stone Natural History Museum in Na'an, China. And as you'd expect, the embryo was only tiny and measured just 27 centimeters long. And at the time, the embryo was dubbed Baby Yingliang and has gone down in history as one of the most complete dinosaur embryos ever found. And it was the embryo's posture in particular that scientists found interesting, as it wasn't like others that had been seen. In a 2021 study conducted by the University of Birmingham and China University Geosciences Beijing, the embryo was described as having a bird-like posture, as its head was lying below the body with the feet on either side and the back curled along the blunt end of the egg. And this is known as tucking, something which is associated with modern-day birds. So here's a picture of this little baby dinosaur in the embryo. In the 2021 study, it was said that such posture was previously unrecognized in a non-avian dinosaur, but reminiscent of a late-stage modern bird embryo. And this little prenatal dinosaur looks just like a baby bird curled in its egg. Brusetti went on to describe baby Yingling as one of the most beautiful fossils I've ever seen. Fion Wasuma, joint first author and PhD researcher at the University of Birmingham, added at the time, "We are very excited about the discovery of baby Yingling, and it's preserved in great condition and helps us to answer a lot of questions about dinosaur growth and reproduction with it. And it is interesting to see this dinosaur embryo and a chicken embryo pose in a similar way inside the egg, which possibly indicates similar pre-hatching behaviors." Just because it was inside of an egg doesn't mean it evolved, because God said that he made each species after its own kind. So we must not forget that truth. Now, this is one of the coolest discoveries and one of the oldest that they've ever found. It's called the Silene stenophylla, known as the narrow-leafed campion, and it's a flower that was found in permafrost in Siberia and is the oldest living plant on Earth. In 2012, Russian scientists discovered the flower's seeds and fruit in fossilized squirrel burrows in the permafrost of Siberia's Yakutia region. Radiocarbon dating estimated the fruit to be around 31,800 years old. Scientists were able to regenerate the plant from the fruit tissue, which they cultivated in a nutrient-rich goop and then transplanted into soil. The regenerated plant was able to blossom, bear fruit, and incredibly drop seeds. The discovery of the Silene stenophylla demonstrates that tissue can survive ice conservation for tens of thousands of years, and it also suggests that plants have built-in mechanisms to preserve or repair their DNA. Now, just to go a little bit more in depth about the discovery of this flower and its fruit, it says the 32,000-year-old plant brought back to life, oldest yet feat, may help scientists preserve seeds for the future. And this was published by National Geographic in 2012. I actually did a story about this before, but I'm just including this with these other incredible discoveries about the skin on the dinosaur. And you know, resurrecting these ancient things that are extinct. But the oldest plant ever to be regenerated has been grown from 32,000-year-old seeds, beating the previous record holder by some 30,000 years. And I told the story about the Methuselah date palm tree that grew from a 2,000-year-old seed that I believe it came from Masada. And that actually, you know, sprouted and bore these date palm trees, and now they have propagated, they got a female version of the plant so that it could propagate fruit. So now it is bearing the date palm fruit. But to go on with this story, a Russian team discovered a seed cache of Silene stenophylla, a flowering plant native to Siberia that had been buried by an ice age squirrel near the banks of the Kulma River. Radiocarbon dating confirmed that the seeds were 32,000 years old. The mature and immature seeds, which had been entirely encased in ice, were unearthed from 124 feet, which is 38 meters, below the permafrost, surrounded by layers that included mammoth, bison, and woolly rhinoceros bones. So these could have been things that were destroyed in Noah's flood, and they were all there together. And keep in mind that they have found a mammoth that was chewing on these buttercup flowers, which means that something happened, you know, when the flowers were in bloom, that the animal was chewing on these when the disaster hit. But the mature seeds had been damaged, perhaps by the squirrel itself to prevent them from germinating in the burrows, but some of the immature seeds retained viable plant material. The team extracted that tissue from the frozen seeds, placed it in vials, and successfully germinated the plants, according to a new study. The plants, identical to each other but with different flower shapes from modern stenophylla, grew, flowered, and after a year created seeds of their own. Plant study may help seed vaults. The new study suggests that permafrost could be a depository for an ancient gene pool, a place where any number of now extinct species could be found and resurrected, experts say. Certainly some of the plants that were cultivated in ancient times and have gone extinct, or other plants once important to ecosystems which have disappeared, would be very useful today if they could be brought back. Resurrected, said Elaine Soloway, a botanist at the Arava Institute for Environmental Studies in Israel. Soloway resurrected the 2,000-year-old date palm that previously held the title of oldest regenerated seed that was resurrected. Her palm seed, though, had been buried in a dry, cool area, a far cry from the stenophylla seed's permafrost environment. Regenerating seeds that have been frozen at 19 degrees Fahrenheit, which is minus 7 degrees Celsius, for so long could have major implications, said Soloway, who was not involved in the new study. And that's because all seed-saving projects, the most famous being perhaps Norway's so-called Doomsday Vault, aka the Svalbard Global Seed Vault, depend on freezing seeds. Any insight gained on seeds which have been frozen and how to thaw them and sprout them is very valuable, she said. The Missouri Botanical Gardens Raven added that if we can uncover the conditions that kept the seeds viable for 32,000 years, then if you were doing it yourself, you'd be able to preserve seeds for longer. Regenerated Seed Study published this week in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. Cool thing about the Methuselah date palm tree, she did more than one tree. It started out with the one tree, Methuselah, and named Methuselah because Methuselah was the oldest living person just before the flood came. So what's interesting about that is that they had to go through all of this botanical, scientific creating the fruit from this ancient date palm. And so now they have harvested the date palm fruit of 2,000 years ago when Jesus lived. And they've been basically extinct. Could it be an indicator of how close we are to the Lord's return, and that this is trying to get people to turn back to the Lord before the destruction comes upon the earth? And you know, if you think about the things that were preserved in Herculaneum, at the site where Mount Vesuvius buried all of the people and animals, and you know, the ash layer of the lava has been excavated, and they found even seeds from back then. They found even loaves of bread. So they had the baker's mark on top of them, and it's just totally amazing. So, you know, how they found horses that when they found the void in the ash, they were able to put the plaster Paris in the hole, and it took the shape of whatever object had died inside that void. So they have these people clawing and, you know, covering their mouths and everything, so we can see how these people died in the volcano of Mount Vesuvius centuries ago. And they have the horses laying there too, which is incredible. You know, and only a couple of decades ago, they didn't even know about the DNA strand. So we live in times where these things can be scientifically brought back to life and resurrected. And I totally think it's a sign of it being like the days of Noah before the Lord comes and the final destruction comes on the earth for all of the unbelieving, godless people that will not turn to him. And one more thing that I thought of is that we never lived in a day and age when somebody rebuilt by the measurements of Noah's Ark until our time frame, and that ark is in Kentucky. And it is totally the size of Noah's Ark, the way that it was built, and never before in history has there been Noah's Ark rebuilt. So we are truly living in the days as it was in the days of Noah, just on these levels alone, not to mention all the other things that people talk about. People go on and on about the Nephilim and all that stuff. I never really got into that. But this totally excites me because I think these are undeniable signs of the Lord's soon return. And the fact that they do have a full-sized Ark of Noah that was never rebuilt before our time period, when the Lord, as we already know, is getting ready to return for the rapture, and then the 7-year time of the judgment, and then he returns. So, truly stunning stuff. This is totally thrilling. I'll see you in the next episode.